Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado. We're here on Sunday, November 13th, almost exactly 24 hours removed from kickoff of Oregon State's 38-10 dominant showing against California at Research Stadium. Angie, in the immediate aftermath of this game where Oregon State bounces back from a loss at Washington, improves to 7-3, secures a winning season for the second straight year, it feels like the Beavers have generated some momentum going into the stretch run. And we're going to break all of it down here on today's episode of the podcast, run through a rankings update. Oregon State fans maybe liking the AP Top 25 this morning. We'll talk about the impact of the win, the injury tracker, because that is a key point of note from this game after a very costly win for Oregon State. Some stats, we'll run through the game flow, hit on what went well for Oregon State, what didn't, and then touch on our keys to the game and how Oregon State accomplished or did not accomplish the things we set out for the Beavers to do. But Angie, as we are here about exactly a day from when this thing kicked off. What are your thoughts generally on Oregon State bouncing back and getting a big time win against the Golden Bears?
I think it's huge, Carter. I mean, you and I both expected wins, but we thought it could be a really close game. We've seen Cal play USC really tough. We've seen them play some really close games. I know when we had Jackson Moore on, he talked about the O-line and the struggles there, but they still have a really good quarterback who has already picked Oregon State apart last year at Purdue. 3 great receivers, a really great running back in Jaden Ott, and the defense completely shut them down. I mean, that might be up there with one of the best defensive performances. It is stat-wise, but one of the better performances we've seen from an Oregon State team in the 2000s, so the past 22 years. Just a huge overall win, momentum. I thought offense, we can talk a little bit more about that, but I really saw a lot. I mean, I guess I've been banging the drum a lot, so it was nice to see more fly motion and some slants and really kind of getting the defense backed up from just stacking the box trying to stop the run.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a 3-phased win for Oregon State, getting it done on offense, defense, and of course special teams as well, with a punt return touchdown, which we are going to dive into and talk about Anthony Gould's contributions in that element of the game, because that has been a huge boost for the Beavers this season, as we'll get to. If you're watching us live on YouTube, you can see Angie and I are matching today. We've got our gray hoodies on. We're kind of lounging on this Sunday. Yeah. But I've actually, if you might have noticed, my video is a little crisper here, thanks to a new Mac update. I'm actually using my phone as my camera here. So it took us a few minutes to get this set up, but like, I feel like I look brighter. I look crisper. This is pretty cool stuff. So we'll definitely be doing this moving forward. If you're watching us live on YouTube, you can see that. If you are listening anywhere you get your podcast, thanks for joining us via the multitude of channels through which you can find the Damn Podcast. So let's get into it with a look at the rankings, because Oregon State did jump back into the AP Top 25 with this win over California, outdoing Texas by 4 voting points and coming up just shy of Oklahoma State by 4. So it was close there at the bottom, but Oregon State does sneak back in over the Longhorns to number 25 in the AP poll. Angie, this game is a surprise to me. I did not think that, regardless of what Oregon State did against Cal, I just didn't think that it would be enough to jump I believe 12 teams that were ahead of them. But with enough shakeup at the bottom there and enough teams losing, and Oregon State really just dominating this thing, the voters took note and gave Oregon State some respect this week.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect it either, Carter, to be really honest. But like you said, this wasn't just a eke by win. This was a very dominant performance. And I think when you look at the three losses, they're all to ranked teams. I mean, and then to lose two of those games by a combined 6 points to Washington, who just knocked off Oregon, and USC. This is a team that's right, I think, on the cusp of being right there.
Oregon State's resume all year has been that of a quality loss team, where the Beavers still really don't have a quote unquote quality win to their name. But when you look at the losses, it's to ranked teams, as you mentioned, two of them by a combined 6 points, one of them on the road at Washington, and of course the other on the road at Utah. So the voters respecting that, and Oregon State unfortunately won't have a chance to get one of those quality wins until the final game of the regular season against that Oregon team that just lost to Washington in Eugene. But the Beavers checking in at 25 in the AP poll. Interestingly, Oregon State still has not been ranked in the coaches poll this year. So when the Beavers jumped into the CFP rankings and the AP rankings in ahead of that game at Washington, the Beavers were the first team out of the coaches poll. They are 2 spots back of number 25 this week. So they're still yet to break into that one. And then the college football rankings this week will come out Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific on ESPN. So we'll see. I mean, again, Oregon State could be playing Arizona State without a number next to its name if the Beavers don't crack into those rankings again. Off the top of your head, Angie, do you feel like the Beavs have a shot to get into the CFP top 25? I'm hesitant. I think this is a case of the AP poll being, I don't know, a little more finicky than the committee.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a shot. It'll be close. They could eke in there though at 25.
We will see. Regardless, it's impressive for Oregon State to get back in there after beating a team that has only won 3 games this year.
Yeah, I mean, but bouncing back the way they did, I think that was a huge one. And I think honestly, playing that little bit earlier of a game, a 6 o'clock start time, and it was only a 3-hour game, so it was over by 9 midnight back east, but so much earlier than what we've seen the rest of the year. I think more voters actually got to see the team in action.
Outside of what the rankings are showing in the immediate aftermath of this, let's, I guess, talk about what this might mean moving forward, because after the Washington game, we said, well, what's Oregon State playing for at this point? Feels like it lost all the momentum. Well, a win like that, it was very clear that the team was not, drowned in its sorrows and focused on losing to UW and saying, all right, what do we have left now? The Beavers just came out and from the get-go were far and away the better team and looked like it all night. Are you impressed with the dominance after losing a disappointing game like that, or is that kind of what you expected from a team that's so veteran-led?
No, I didn't expect them to be that solid in all phases. I expected them to win. I didn't expect a huge let-off just because we have talked about they are a very veteran team. I like the leadership of this group, but I did not foresee them coming out and just completely smacking Cal in the mouth and just dominating. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the news already, Carter. It broke right before we started taping, but Cal has fired offensive coordinator Bill Musgrave and offensive line coach Angus McClure. Those are 2 big name college coaches now that just got let go from Cal after that tromping. And I looked back at Cal's schedule and they haven't been tromped all season, really. I mean, to score 3 points offensively, one, they did score a touchdown, but that was on that scoop and score fumble. Oregon State, again, Carter, we can talk about all the stats, but I'm just still kind of in awe. I mean, this is a team that put up 400 yards passing against USC, and Oregon State held them to 151. 9 yards rushing.
Yeah. When
was the last time you saw a team rush for 9 yards?
Well, against Oregon State, it was 2007. And in fact, the Beavers held 2 opponents to 9 yards or fewer in that season. I've got some superlatives loaded up later in the show here. So talking about building momentum for the stretch run here, Oregon State, 2 regular season games left, and then the bowl game. Beavers come into this thing the ASU game, its final road trip at 7-3. potentially ranked in the top 25. I mean, in the AP poll they are, but the committee, we'll see if they get in there as well. Feels like Oregon State kind of back in the limelight a little bit, coming off of a win like that. They've got a chance to really build some momentum going into the rivalry game. I mean, that game's looking more and more important since Oregon did lose to Washington. They've got a tough matchup against Utah this week. I mean, Oregon's stretch run is really difficult. Looking at how far Oregon fell in the AP poll, fallen to 12, Oregon State getting back in. I think if Oregon State is dominant at ASU and Oregon loses to Utah, let's say by a score or two, I could see a world where there's only 1 or 2 spots between these two teams going into the final week of the regular season, which makes that game at Reser Stadium between the Beavers and the Ducks all the more important.
Yeah, it's funny because it was super fun. I was in Corvallis all weekend. We went down Friday night. Eric and I, we have our god kids, our friends from Oregon State days. Their kids are now at Oregon State, a freshman and a senior. And so we were there for family weekend with them. And one of them is dating a guy who goes to Oregon. And so John was there, and hearing him talk about he's so excited to come to Civil War and to hear, he's jacked because, he's like, Oregon State's secondary is so good against Oregon's, defense, and Oregon's defense isn't super great. I mean, he's like, it's going to be a great game. It'll be fun to watch, but that Civil War game is going to be bananas.
Yeah, Oregon's secondary really, I think we saw the deficiency there against Washington. You have to think Oregon State's passing game has been a weakness. Well, maybe it can find something against that defense. And if that's the case, we could be in for an absolute classic at Reser with, I think, Oregon State having a lot of strengths on its side that match up well against Oregon. And we'll see what the Bo Nix situation is like injury-wise coming into that game. Again, we can't get ahead of ourselves. This is exactly what you worry about with a team that might not be as veteran led as Oregon State and as focused as the Beavers have been this year. This is the kind of spot where the Beavs could go lay an egg at ASU because they're looking ahead to Oregon. Yeah. I have a feeling that will absolutely not be the case, just based off of everything we've seen from this team under Jonathan Smith, the discipline that they play.
Kyrie Fisher after the game, somebody asked the question and he kind of laughed and he goes, yeah, we're looking forward to playing. And I think he referred to them as those guys. Yeah, we're looking forward to playing those guys. But we have ASU and they're a great team. And after we take care of business in Tempe, then we can start thinking about those guys.
It's fun that we're at the point of the season where we can start to have these conversations, though.
Those guys.
I like, and that. especially with the Ducks losing again, I just think that it doesn't necessarily open the door for Oregon State to like jump up in the bowl standings yet. UCLA losing might impact that a little bit, especially if the Bruins lose to USC. I still think the Beavers are destined for the Sun Bowl, but hey, you win out and you get a little help at the top. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Oregon State could sneak into a Holiday Bowl or a Vegas Bowl, which I think pretty much everybody involved would be thankful to see that. Yeah. So let's say with that shakeup at the top of the standings, if Oregon State does close the season with a 2-0 finish over these next 2 games, I mean, we could see the Beavers crack that top 4 even, which given where we were at a week ago talking about this team really not having much left on the table, it's funny how much things can change in the span of 1 week.
I mean, because Carter, like you and I talked about Thursday, all these games were like huge. I mean, UCLA was a huge favorite. Oregon was a 2-score favorite. It was kind of a weekend that I think people thought was going to be kind of just a blowout weekend for all the favorites. Proved not to be, and anything can kind of happen in the Pac-12.
Yeah, some did take care of business. USC throttled Colorado, Oregon State,
but they had a cost too. They it looks like Travis Dye is out for the season. I don't know if we have a full, but I did see him return with a cast on his look like foot or ankle. So he looks to be out.
It's a good segue into our next segment here, the injury tracker, which we normally put at the bottom of the show, but We
Too
have
important.
we have to touch on this before we dive into the game, because really outside of the win and the big defensive numbers, the biggest outcome of this game was just all the injuries that Oregon State sustained. So the obvious ones that we saw during the course of action, guys actually going down on the field. Jack Coletto, obviously that hurts immensely for Oregon State.
So many areas.
If he's unable to go next week or the rest of the season with that hamstring injury that actually took him to the locker room, that'd be a huge loss for the Beavs. Jam Griffin in the running back room went down. Deshaun Fenwick actually didn't even play in the game. He was wearing a boot on his foot. So running back depth, all of a sudden a concern. Having Damian Martinez in that room and getting Trey Lowe back helps for sure. But I mean, that's 2/3 of your three-headed monster there going down in one game. On the offensive line, Taliesa Fuaga and Hanele Bloomfield both left with injuries. Fuaga, of course, a starter, and Bloomfield, a key reserve who does get quite a bit of playing time. And then in the defensive backfield, we actually didn't see this really during the course of play, but we saw the backups come in for these two, and it's Alex Austin and Jaden Grant, who have been would it be fair to say that those are the two best players in that secondary? I mean, I don't want to diminish what Rajon Wright and Katano Ladapo have done, but losing Austin and Grant's
huge. I mean, it is really huge. I mean, that's just it. Yeah. I never like to say best players in the secondary, because all four of those guys, and then Ryan Cooper into the mix, they all have been pretty special. But those two right there are key. Hanele, though, correct me if I'm wrong, Marco Brewer's out, and isn't Bloomfield his replacement now?
You're right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Bloomfield is a starter now.
Yeah. So now we are down 3 of the 5 starters on the offensive line.
The silver lining, I guess, is that Jonathan Smith said after the game, none of them, at least in the in the very short term amount of time that he had to digest the injuries and learn from the training staff, none of them seem to be season ending. Now, obviously that can change. You've got further examinations. You've got a day of practice tomorrow. The rest and recovery period of Sundays could reveal some things. And we could find out on Monday at Smith's press conference that some of these guys are going to be done for the year. But at the end of the game, Smith said, as of now, we are not ruling anybody out.
Okay, but Carter, do you tell me this? Okay, and the other one, too, that was not on our list is John McCartan. He was ruled, He was a scratch at the very end, or right before the game started. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. I mean, Smith isn't ever very forthcoming with injuries. Did you really expect him to?
Season ending, no.
True. But did you think anybody was going to he'd come and say season ending at the press conference right after the game?
I don't know. I mean, you send a guy to the locker room like Coletto, you take his helmet away. Like you do wonder about that one. But again, that's what Monday press conferences are for. So stick with BeaverBlitz about 18 hours from now, and we'll have some news.
But he didn't seem broken up. I mean, he was laughing on the sidelines, and so
he probably would be regardless, knowing him. But yeah, who knows? As I mentioned, Trey Lowe made his return in the running back room, his first appearance for Oregon State since game 1. So good to see Trey Lowe getting back out there. We know that he had returned to practice last week, but impressive to see him make that quick recovery, getting back from practice into the game. And really, he was forced into that thing because of the injuries to some other guys in the room. But nonetheless, Trey Lowe back in action, and we really expect to see quite a bit of him moving forward now if Fenwick and Griffin can't go next week. Everett Hayes in the kicking game made his full return. He was fully available for Washington, but didn't attempt any field goals because Oregon State elected to go for it on 4th down in the red zone, as we know very well by this point. We've discussed it. But Hayes did return in full capacity, took pretty much all of the kicking duties this week. Chance Nolan, Joe Golden, Luke Musgrave, Alton Julian, Ryan Frankie, all unavailable. No surprise on that front there. Anything else to add? Angie, did I miss anyone there? There was a lot to keep track.
I know there was a lot. That was one of my big takeaways from this game was, yes, it was amazing watching the Beavs dominate in all 3 phases, but those injuries, for a team that's been, and I would say pretty pretty lucky with the injury bug. I say that, but then again, they lost Luke Musgrave, who was probably their best offensive weapon right out of the gate, game 2, to be without him. And then Alton
your starting
Julian
quarterback.
Your starting quarterback. O-linemen, though, are always tough. I mean, we see how important an offensive line is. Just look at Cal. I mean, just how much they struggled.
Yeah, no doubt. Oregon State certainly hoping to get at least some of those guys back for ASU, considering that's, 6 starters. I mean, these aren't guys who come in off the bench for a play or two here and there. These are all conference caliber players in Grant and Austin and Coletto, of course, up for a national award in the Hornung Award. So we'll find out on Monday if there are any updates there.
Tolly, I mean, that's, when you look at Peter Riley Osborne's trench reports each week, Tolly is one of the top offensive linemen grade wise every week. They all very, very important. And so hopefully nothing is too serious.
And a nominee for the Polynesian Player of the Year award. So
true. Yep.
He was a mid-season All-American for Pro Football Focus as well. So that's again a huge loss on the right side of Oregon State's line.
It is. But on a little bright spot, I was texting. I text with people like all game long. Peter did reach out during the game and was very impressed with what we were seeing from Miller.
Yeah, Tanner Miller came in and replaced Bloomfield, I believe, at left guard. Tanner Miller, the walk-on redshirt freshman, third year,
I believe, so.
Fourth year. Yeah. Been here for a while as the backup center and got some action there. Tyler Morano as well.
Yes,
he filled in for Fuaga at tackle, and I mean at that point Oregon State really didn't have to do much offensively, but the Beavers did score a few points in the second half as well. So those replacements were doing their jobs. All right. You want to dive into the stat book a little bit here? Because there are a lot of great nuggets in this one.
Let's do it.
All right. So, of course, the final score, Oregon State 38, California 10. It was as dominant on the scoreboard as it was in the stat book. Oregon State outgains Cal 362 to 160 in the yardage category. Now, 362 yards is not great for the Oregon State offense, but it was more than enough as the Beavers scored all of the points they needed very early in this game, actually putting it out of reach in the first quarter. But of course, the number that stands out is the rush total. So 160 yards is the most, or is the fewest Oregon State is allowed to a Pac-12 opponent since 2009.
Okay.
And the rushing yards, 9, fewest rushing yards by an opponent, like I said, since 2007, when Oregon State had the number 1 rush defense in the country. I actually went back and looked at the leaderboard that year, and surprised me to see Boston College at number 2 in run defense. It was like Oregon State, BC, I want to say Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, something like that. So, you get the Blue Bloods, you get Oregon State up there with a great year, but kind of a fun Easter egg in the stat book on that one to see Boston College and Oregon State leading the country that year. But I mean the 9 yards, Jaden Ott only had 20 for Cal, the true freshman standout at running back. Golden Bears average 0.6 of a yard per carry on their 16 attempts. Just absolute dominance. One more note too is if you look at the sack adjusted rushing yards, Cal still only had 44 yards on the ground. So you get from 44 to 6 because the Beavers sacked Jack Plummer a handful of times for big losses. But I think what's really telling in that department is Plummer finished the game with negative 20 rushing yards, and that included a 15-yard gain. So the Beavers dominant really in all facets defensively in this one. Especially when it comes to defending the run.
And it's interesting because, we were talking about this game, and the question was, do you commit to stopping Jaden Ott and risk, giving Plummer time? And we kind of bantered about that a little bit, and it really didn't even matter because the Bees were able to do both.
Yeah, one of my keys to the game. So spoiler alert, they converted on that one. On the flip side, Angie, were you impressed with Oregon State's running game? Because 166 yards is, I guess, a little bit fewer than we're accustomed to seeing, but still, Damian Martinez crosses the century mark for the 4th straight game. So he takes 23 carries, gets 105 yards. He was held out of the end zone, but this is now 4 straight games of at least 100 yards for Martinez, who is very clearly RB1 right now.
Yeah.
He's taken the lion's share of carries. That will only continue if these injuries, well, it won't, you know what I mean? It will only continue to grow as those injuries mount up in the room. We've run out of good things to say about Damian Martinez, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, you guys all knew how I felt about him, back in about April. So great one. I really do think he's going to be a special one. Am I surprised that they didn't rush for more? Maybe a little, but it never felt like Oregon State couldn't run if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And so I actually thought they used it more as almost like a scrimmage in it, that they were able to get Ben some opportunities to go through the air a little bit and work on some things that way.
And Ben scored a rushing touchdown as well, snuck it in for 1 yard for Oregon State's first touchdown of the game. Jam Griffin also found the end zone on the ground before getting injured. Those are the 2 rushing touchdowns. How about Isaiah Newell? So
I was so excited to see him go in, and he scored, and then that got called back. But he actually had a couple really good carries.
One of them for 13 yards. He finishes the game with 18 on 4 carries. Looked solid. He's looked solid every time he's touched the ball. But again, when you've got like 4 starting caliber running backs in your room, it's going to be tough to find opportunities. But do you think we see an Isaiah Newell role carved out if Griffin and Fenwick can't go next week? And if Lowe is still not,
I hope so.
Totally 100%.
I mean, I hope so, just because every time I've seen him in the game, he does well. So I think he's waiting for an opportunity, and he came in super highly touted. And I like guys that I see work, and he's been working and just patiently waiting for his chance. And like I said, I guess that's what kind of disappointed me when they called that touchdown back, because I was excited for him. It would have been his first collegiate touchdown, and he seemed so excited, and then they called it back. Not his fault. I mean, he got it, but I hope he does get a few more carries, because I think he's earned that right just by keeping, he stayed with Oregon State when he could have transferred a while ago, and really been there and worked hard.
Oregon State not particularly dominant in the passing game on either side of the ball, but again, did what it needed to do offensively and held Jack Plummer to 151 passing yards on the other side. So 4 players threw passes for Oregon State in this one. Ben Branson's line, 15 of 23, that's 65%, for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not spectacular, not like incredibly efficient, but certainly one of Branson's best games. And we have these discussions every week on how efficient he is, how good he looks, his game manager-esque approach to leading this offense. I felt like you couldn't really ask for a whole lot more from him. I mean, a couple of checkdowns and, short passes and whatnot. But again, Ben just continues to put Oregon State in situations to be successful. And, really, when you throw a backup quarterback out there for half the season, that's all you can ask for.
Yeah, there was one error that scoop and score that led to the scoop and score, and it looked like a miscommunication on the handoff, whether that was supposed to go to Damian Martinez, who was kind of in an H-back role. So that was a miscommunication. And then, he had a surefire touchdown to Trayshawn Harrison that just went right through Trayshawn's hands, which, gosh, this game could have been even more of a blowout if, you connect on that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the yardage on that would have been. It was a deep ball.
It was a deep ball.
At the time, I texted you because I didn't have a good angle on it in the press box. It was on the other side of the field on the far end. And so I couldn't really tell if that was a misplaced ball or a drop or whatnot. But
it went right through his hands.
Yeah, credit to Ben for putting that ball on the money. Tristan Gebbia got in the game at the end for Oregon State, actually completed a couple of passes. If I remember correctly, those are the first 2 passes he's thrown this year, correct?
Yeah.
Unless he threw one against Montana State that I'm not remembering, but I don't think
so.
he got into that game.
Yeah, I think those were his first 2.
Yeah, because I believe
I thought
Branson
Ben
at that time was
he was the backup, and Ben got in that game.
Yeah. Jack Coletto, 1 of 1 for 37 yards. Not bad. He threw that 4th and 1, 4th and 2 ball to a diving Anthony Gould, arguably the play of the game, something that Oregon State had dialed up in practice this week and practiced it throughout the week and ran through it and said, Gould said after the game, there was no way we weren't going to convert on that after how much effort we put into it in practice. And the ball from Coletto, it led him a little bit, but to Coletto's credit, absolute spiral, put it where only Gould could get to it. And Gould, with his speed and his athleticism, that diving catch, pretty impressive all the way around.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a fun play, and you need to do that because you got to keep defenses honest. I think they were all getting a little comfortable that if Coletto was in the game on a third or fourth and short, that he was going to run it. Okay, they really don't know what he's going to do.
Jam Griffin threw the final pass in the ledger for Oregon State. It was a reverse play, and it fell incomplete. And one of those where if it was a backwards pass, it would have been a fumble, but it was just a poorly executed trick play design. Yeah. Which, interestingly, I felt like Brian Lindgren really opened up the playbook in this game, which I didn't necessarily expect. You might think Oregon State would go a little vanilla against California, just given that it didn't really need to pull these tricks out of its hat to win this game. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was impressed because I've been very critical of some of the play calling. Like I said, Oregon State isn't going to be a strong passing team. So most teams know that they have to, stop the run. And if you stop the run, it's going to be really tough for Oregon State to move the ball. So to counteract that, you run fly sweep, but you run the fly sweep motion on most plays just because then teams don't know. I mean, you don't want to be the team that only runs the fly sweep motion when you're going to actually hand off and run the fly sweep. So we saw that. We saw some slants. We saw that misdirection. That's the kind of stuff we need to see because Oregon State isn't going to be world beaters throwing down the field.
More trick plays and more end arounds and more fly sweeps, says Angie Machado.
Or at least run it. Yeah.
I
mean, you run the motion because if you run the motion, it just gives you options to either check down. It keeps defenses a little more on their heels instead of just coming straight ahead to crash in the run.
Defensively, Jack Plummer held to 22 of 34 passing, again, 65% right there with Gulbranson for 151 yards, 1 pick and no touchdowns. Impressive, I think, to hold him to 151 yards, given the game script of this thing, where you knew Cal was going to have to pass the ball a ton once it got down early and couldn't fight back. This was not going to be a run-heavy scheme for the Golden Bears in the slightest. So holding Plummer to 151 is impressive. Makes sense, I guess, because you knew that he was going to pass the ball. You could bring a little pressure. You could send more guys into coverage. Didn't have to load up against the run at all. But still, I think a pretty solid showing by the Oregon State pass defense.
Yeah, I mean, the defense played lights out the entire all facets. It was, like I said, because Cal, I mean, Plummer's a good quarterback, and they have those 3 receivers that are really, really solid. So to see that stopped, and I mean, basically Cal had no answers. If you saw Justin Wilcox's press conference after the game, he just looked exasperated. Like he didn't even know what to say.
That's Justin Wilcox after any game. Actually, I watched his post-game press conference after the loss to Oregon, and he looked like a guy who was really regretting not taking the Oregon job. But not that I can't remember how that went down. I can't remember if he turned it down or if he was even offered or anything. But it looked like a guy who wanted to be on that Oregon sideline and not the Cal sideline. I
mean, yeah, he just looked like a beaten man, just kind of staring straight ahead and. Yeah, it was not pretty for Coach Wilcox last night.
Yeah. The best play in Oregon State's pass defense actually came from an inside linebacker as Kyrie Fisher-Morris intercepted Jack Plummer on a play that it was the first play of a drive after Oregon State scored a touchdown. So you go about 5 seconds of game action with a touchdown and a pick. And Kyrie actually had a lane to the end zone and probably would have given Oregon State its 3rd pick 6 in as many games, which would have been absolutely remarkable.
Crazy.
If not for Katana Oladapo accidentally tripping him up and tackling. They got a good laugh out of that. Kyrie actually in the post-game press conference was asked, did you think you were going to score? And he said, did I? But I guess there was a good chuckle about it in the locker room and on the sideline between those two. So in the turnover department, Cal's lone touchdown came on a turnover. Oregon State's really lone blemish as far as gameplay goes was that fumbled exchange, that the Cal return 33 yards for a scoop and score touchdown. 7 defensive points, 3 offensive points. You will take that for sure. But that play, that's one Oregon State will circle and say, hey, we can't have that in big time games. We gotta secure those those exchanges.
So that's the second time now that we've seen a fumbled kind of miscue handoff. One was to, I believe it was Coletto, and then this one.
In the front 7 for both sides and the matchup against the offensive lines, Oregon State won that battle in the trenches for sure. Much stronger showing from Oregon State compared to really the ineptitude I thought that we saw in the pass rush against Washington last week. The Beavers just couldn't generate anything in Seattle and struggled in the front 7, to say the least. They get to Plummer twice. They hurry him 5 times. He was never comfortable back there. As I said before, you look at the sack adjusted rushing yards, and I mean, he lost like 35 yards on sacks. Was pressured all night. I thought it was a huge step forward from that group.
Yeah, definitely. Still really, I think Oregon State's like one really good edge rusher away on defense of really making some noise there. But they're doing enough to get it done, obviously. And
they did it without John McCartan too, actually.
Exactly.
Andrew Chatfield Jr. had a nice play. He forced a fumble in this game and had a tackle for a loss. I want to say it was on 3rd down, the big play, and really good to see him make some flashes, because we haven't really said his name as much as I kind of thought we would going into the year.
Yeah, but the Beavs are missing, you're right, Chatfield, because he is that kind of edge rush linebacker-esque. Yeah, McCartan.
On the flip side, no sacks on Ben Gulbranson. Good to see, considering you've got a couple of backups there for Oregon State on the offensive line. I guess the one knock maybe on Oregon State's play in the trenches, 3.7 yards per carry in the run game is not great, especially when you compare it to what Oregon State normally does on the ground. A credit to California for getting into the backfield 5 times, 5 tackles for loss. But again, Oregon State really, it never seemed like the Beavers couldn't run it when they wanted to.
Nope, it was pretty much run at will.
All right. This is feels like a good place for a break. Catch our breaths a little bit. Remind everyone to head to BeaverBlitz.com as we enter the stretch run of this 2022 football season. Oregon State continuing to build momentum for these final 2 games here. They'll head to Tempe on Saturday for a morning kickoff in Oregon against Arizona State. Neither of us are making the trip this week. We're not going to be able to make it down to Arizona. We will be heading to the bowl game, I believe, but we're staying home for this one. So follow along with us at Beaver Blitz. We won't have boots on the ground, but we still will have coverage of Oregon State versus Arizona State. And of course, we're going to preview it throughout the week. We'll have coverage of Jonathan Smith's press conference on Monday, videos up on YouTube throughout the week, some matchup previews, behind the scenes analysis from the Sun Devil Source guys along the 24/7 Sports Network, and much more at BeaverBlitz.com. So head over there, grab a subscription, join us now before the football season ends, and we'd love to have you. All right, so game flow, unless there's anything you want to add, Angie, before we go into some of the big chronological plays here.
Let's do it.
All right, so it starts well for Oregon State. Defensively, so Cal starts with the ball, and this was the first sign of this being a dominant defensive game for Oregon State. Cal got a first down, but then moved backwards as Alex Austin came up with an 11-yard sack of Jack Plummer on 3rd down. One of those plays that ignites the Reeser crowd. You know, the chainsaws going, the crowd's amped up on 3rd down, and they get a play like that. One of the loudest moments at Reeser came on that first drive, and it set up an offensive possession where Oregon State took advantage right away, scored on its first possession. That Coletto pass to Anthony Gould for 37 yards set up a Ben Gulbranson 1-yard quarterback sneak on 4th and goal from inches out. So 2 4th down conversions on the first drive. Great to see Oregon State maintaining something offensively there, because they did capitalize on some short fields throughout the game, but they also put together a couple of impressive drives, and that was certainly one of them.
Absolutely. And then like I said, then to turn around again when Cal gets the ball and follow that up with that interception and score. It was a Jam Griffin 5-yard touchdown run. Seriously, I mean, it was 14-0 before I think Cal even like really figured out the game had started.
Yeah, it was 14-0 before Cal had even really gotten its second possession.
Yeah.
Because, that technically what was its second was wasted with a pick on the first play. And that was all the points Oregon State needed. 14-10 would have won you this game. And the Beavers got there with 2 minutes left in the first quarter and put those points on the board in the span of 3 minutes. So impressive to see the Beavers kind of run away with this thing very early and then really coast to the finish line. They forced a 3-and-out to end the first quarter, which became a trend. Cal went 3-and-out, I believe, 4 times in this game.
Yeah. They only had
3 of those.
Downs.
Yeah, and that was the first of 3 in a row, actually. In between those, or on the second 3-and-out, Anthony Gould steps back to receive a punt, and it was the Montana State game where he went, I believe it was it 80 yards?
82, something like that, yeah.
I believe he went 80 yards on the punt return. He goes 55 on this one to the house to put Oregon State up 21-0. At that point, I was like, all right, this thing is done. So Cal is not putting up 21 points on this Oregon State defense. But that being the second return touchdown of the year for Anthony Gould gives him more than any Beaver since Sammy Strotter in 2006. When
it's so nice to have that as a weapon. Because that was one of the things with Sammy, you just didn't know. And I think Anthony Gould is kind of becoming that guy, like electric, in that you don't know what's going to happen when he touches the ball.
Yeah. I actually thought the parallels to, so Sammy Strotter in 06 had that punt return touchdown against USC.
Yeah.
And I thought that the parallels between Gould, kind of joining the Strotter, stratosphere. The Strotter stratosphere on that punt return. It was kind of cool to see because it was a very similar, he's going the same side of the field. Yep. He went to the same sideline even. It was a very similar punt return to the one that Strotter had against USC in 06. So congrats to Anthony Gould for cementing his name in the Oregon State, at least recent record books. With his second punt return touchdown of the year. Cal goes 3-and-out again, the third in a row. And then Oregon State has a chance to make this a 4-possession game. Technically 3 if you go touchdown, 2-point conversion 3 times. But Everett Hayes returns to field goal action. His first field goal attempt, I believe, since the USC game with a 53-yarder that he misses wide right.
Yeah.
Cal turns it over on downs. And then the Golden Bears, they come up with the scoop and score, which, again, really the only thing that didn't go in Oregon State's favor other than the injury bug in this game. Jeremiah Irby was responsible for it. Angie, I looked back in the stat book to try to figure out who fumbled it, and I need your opinion here, or your memory, if it serves, on who fumbled this for Oregon State.
I'm trying to. I believe Martinez was in the eye, and I don't know if it was Jam Griffin or I don't. So they had an I formation with 2 backs. It was more of a fumble during the handoff.
Sure.
So I'm not sure if you're going to credit that fumble to Ben Gulbranson or Damian Martinez, but Damian was not expecting the handoff. Ben hands it off, and the ball just goes down. But the same time, everybody's crashing down. They're all like, Damian Martinez doesn't even know he's supposed to have the ball. Ben is like trying to scramble, crawl on his hands and knees to get the ball. And Irby just kind of comes through, scoops it up and runs.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're going to give that, if you should give that to Ben or to Martinez, but it was a fumbled handoff.
I believe right now it's actually credited as a team fumble.
Okay.
That might have been why I wasn't able to find who they credit it to. I don't think they credited it to anyone.
Okay.
So if
and
it
fair,
can go down as a team fumble, then I think that's what they decided.
It just seemed like, I mean, it was obvious that the 2 guys were not on the same page.
Yeah. First half ends with a couple of 3-and-outs. Oregon State has a 21-7 lead at the break. And then the Beavers, since they deferred, they won the coin toss, deferred. They get the ball start the second half, and I felt like this was, mind you, after moments after Oregon lost in Eugene, and the crowd at Reesher was actually re-energized a little bit during halftime. It felt like this game kind of crawled to halftime a little bit. Oregon State had already gotten its fireworks out of the way. Then Cal scored and a couple of 3-and-outs. It kind of just, dwindled. That the energy kind of dwindled. But then there was a pretty loud cheer. And, actually, as the game went final, you could hear pockets of the stadium realizing that the Ducks had lost. And then when they flashed it on the screen, it really erupted. Okay. But interestingly, Angie, to kind of break our flow here, I tweeted about that. I said that there was a pretty loud cheer in Reeser when the score was flashed up on the video board. That tweet is now officially my most liked tweet of all time.
Wow.
I tweeted the final score of Oregon State versus California. I think it checked in at like 150, 175. Okay. This thing's up above 700. And to me, that tells me all I need to know about there are a lot of people in this college football world that like to see Oregon lose.
Yes, they do.
And about 28,000 of them were at Reeser Stadium and were re-energized for Oregon State's first possession of the second half when the Beavers moved to California's 31, settle for 3 points. Everett Hayes converts from 49 yards, which I believe at this point is his longest conversion of the year and one of the longest of his career, actually. Of course, he had the 60-yarder against Colorado, but at that point, it's back to a full 3-possession game, and it felt like Cal was done for at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it was great to see Everett kind of come back and kind of right the miss that he had earlier. California, though, they moved the ball. Then that next possession, they tried a 48-yard field goal that missed.
Drastically
bad miss. Yeah. Which was interesting because they were actually moving the ball. It just completely stalled out. And then they missed bad. And then the very next drive, Oregon State scores on an 8-yard touchdown to Harrison.
Yeah. So Harrison actually, that was the Harrison drive. And we should talk a little bit about this because.
Oh, the Lindsey pickup, the fumble. Yes.
So Trayshawn ends the game with 8 receptions, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the most by a single Oregon State receiver this year. And it might actually be Harrison's career high. I should have checked this. This is poor preparation by me not checking that. But I believe that is Harrison's career best. If not, it's very close to it. And he was the leader of that receiving corps this week. But on the drive, had a 34-yarder. It was kind of one of those catch and runs where he I can't remember if it was a screen or like a slant where, he caught it in the short field and then ran for 34 yards, but then he fumbled it and the ball it was one of those where the ball just keeps rolling, but it was rolling forward.
Yeah.
And Tyjon Lindsey was actually there to pick it up and then he ran it for 10 more. So actually ended up being a huge play for Oregon State. Went down as a 44-yard pickup with Harrison getting 34 of them and Lindsey getting 10 on the recovery and return. And then Harrison redeems himself with a sure-handed 8-yard touchdown across the middle. Good to see him kind of bounce back there after his hands again come into question.
Yeah.
Again, that's the thing with Harrison. It's the hands, but when he has the ball in his hands, he is making plays.
Yeah, I mean, it was good to see him actually come back and get that reception because, like I said, that one ball that seriously, he's like this. You can't see me. I'm on. If you're watching live, I mean, he's like has his hands out and the ball just goes right through him. Yeah. I mean, that was a face palm right there.
That brought the end of the third quarter, and Cal moved the ball on one last drive, settled for 3 points as Dario Longhetto converts from 36. But that was we got to talk about this penalty here. So Cal had the ball on Oregon State's 5-yard line, and at this point, we're saying, all right, Oregon State's defense has still pitched a shutout. Cal's only points have come on the defensive side. Oregon State hasn't given up any points when its defense is on the field, and Cal's got the ball on the 5, and we're like, all right, well, there goes that storyline. But then Jack Plummer inexplicably goes about 24 yards deep in the
Backward.
pocket to
Yeah.
escape pressure, and then throws the ball to nobody in particular, and it goes down as a 24-yard intentional grounding penalty.
Yeah.
And then they get nothing on the next play, and it sets up a 36-yard field goal, which ends a 47.5-minute scoreless streak in this game from the Oregon State defense. So again, just credit to the Beavers defensively for just completely shutting California out of this thing, save for that field goal, which could have been again, at the 5-yard line. I was thinking touchdown there, but
yeah. Just, lack of awareness there from a veteran quarterback with Plummer. But then Oregon State, they're not done yet, Carter, because Jack Velling, true freshman tight end, gets in the play with a 2-yard touchdown reception, which really, I mean, that was the nail in the coffin. 4 scores, put Oregon State up, and there were still 7 minutes of this game, but this game was flying. This game went fast. No, not as many penalties. It was a good flowing game.
No complaints for me from a 6 p.m. kickoff. Yeah. I wanted to get out of Corvallis as early as possible. I think I ended up leaving at about 12:15 in the morning, but again, that's much better than in weeks past with these late kickoffs. So shout out to everyone involved for the game that lasted about 3 hours. It was very quick. But yes, Ben Gulbranson and Jack Velling connect for a 2-yard touchdown, which put the finishing touches on this thing. That was really the last notable play, other than Tristan Gebbia coming in and leading the Oregon State twos, picking up a few yards and then getting into victory formation to end it. Let's touch on anything positive and negative for Oregon State that we haven't already gotten to. We already mentioned the rush defense. Okay, so again, this is a case of Oregon State holding opponent at Reser Stadium to 17 or fewer. So still, we're through 5 games at Reser, correct?
Yep.
Yes. 5. Yeah, because you have to remember the neutral site game still a home game. So through 5 games at Reser, only 2 teams have scored 17 points. That's Boise State and USC, and the rest are fewer than that. Makes you wonder what Oregon's going to be able to do when it comes into to Reser in 2 weeks.
It's remarkable what they're doing, and I think what's even more remarkable is where this defense was a year ago, or even the past several years under Clune, under Tibesar, like just the turnaround. This is the same basics group of guys that played under last year, and the turnaround is like remarkable.
Yeah. Speaking of the punt return touchdown, so that's actually the 3rd total return touchdown for Oregon State, because Silas had one, the kickoff
against
touchdown.
Montana State as well.
Yeah.
Bad. I don't like dwelling on negative, but Oregon State still needs, passing game is what you have in the notes, but I just think offensively, be more cohesive, score more points.
Even in a 38-10 game, I feel like there are some things that we can nitpick about and say, Oregon State's got to clean this up. I still don't think, they didn't need the passing game to be firing on all cylinders in this one to win.
But we haven't seen enough that there is a passing game. I mean, really.
Right. Gulbranson had probably his best game yet, I would say, with the 2 scores and completing 65% of his passes. It's a solid line, but again, it's against a team that put up absolutely no fight. So and okay, so here's a point that I think we should make is Cal came into this game averaging 300 yards against through the air, and Oregon State was only able to get 196. Again, game script here didn't necessarily allow for a whole lot of passing, but it didn't feel like the Beavers really took advantage of Cal's defense there.
And we've seen against the better teams, Oregon State is going to need to pass the ball more.
Yeah. The running game was uncharacteristically inefficient, in my opinion. The 3.7 yards per carry, we don't see that often. Martinez and Griffin both at 4.6 atop the Oregon State leaderboard. Again, not really what you expect to see out of them. It was more of a volume kind of game. They needed the 46 carries or something like that to get to where they did, but I don't know how much you read into that in one game.
Yeah, I just don't have the feeling that this offense, if I was going to get it done. So that's, The defense absolutely have 100% confidence. Offense still has some areas to prove, I think.
Yeah. Particularly when it comes to turnovers, still no interceptions in this game, but they fumbled it twice and Cal recovered one of them. Of course, it was costly, taking it to the house for 6 points. So I think we have definitely seen the turnovers cut down with Ben Gulbranson at quarterback. At what cost? Yeah, you're limiting the explosiveness of your offense. But still, we do see from time to time Oregon State has a head-scratching turnover. I mean, go back to Colorado. Yeah. First play from scrimmage, fumble.
Yeah.
Look at this game, 2 fumbles, one of them returned for 6. I mean, those are the kinds of plays you can't have when Oregon comes to town.
No.
Or even when you go on the road with a bunch of starters out potentially against Arizona State.
I mean, the injury bug, and that's the last bad on the note. Yeah, it was bad. I mean, just one after the other. And, we've talked about how healthy Oregon State had been up to this game. Hopefully, I'm hoping that none of these are anything too long-term. Jam's concussion protocol, so he probably won't go, is my guess for ASU. Lower leg, foot injuries for both O-linemen is what I'm hearing. So that'll be, is it a sprain? Is it a break? I didn't see anyone, with boots or anything. Did you see anybody when you were in the media room then later?
No, the only boot I saw was Fenwick.
And we don't know what's going on with McCartan. And then hamstring. Is it just hamstrings can be tricky. We've seen it either. A full tear like Jebbia to, just nagging.
Think
injury.
Back to
David
McCartan
Morris McCartan last year. They can be nagging injuries. So hopefully, again.
It's a really bad time for Oregon State to be bitten by the injury bug, and I think it's unfortunate too for the Beavers that it comes in a game where, half of those guys could have sat out and they still would have won. Winning a game by 28 points, you never want to see anybody go down when you do that. So, all around, just unfortunate for the Beavers. But again, we'll learn more about those injuries on Monday. All right, before we get out of here, we have to go back and revisit our keys to the game. We've already kind of talked about them. We've spoiled some of our report card here, but let's start with Angie's offensive key, which was to find balance in the run and pass, which I thought the Beavers did.
Yeah, 27 pass attempts, 45 carries. It was run heavy, but that was kind of dictated by that early, 3-score lead. 196 yards through the air, 166 on the ground. Again, I'd love to see those numbers inflated a little bit, but they didn't. Seriously, when you win in that dominating fashion, you don't necessarily want to run it up even more.
And 2 touchdowns via both, too.
Both, so, yes. So that was balance.
There's balance in scoring for sure. The 27 pass attempts to 45 carries is more game scripty than anything, I think.
And your key for offense was to take advantage of the Cal secondary. It's kind of, they could have more, I think.
I said they kind of did. They certainly beat the defense on that Coletto throw to Gould. Harrison's 8 catches, he tore up that secondary alone. But again, the overall numbers, it's like 15 of 23 is okay, but you're not dominant against a defense that has given up everything to opponents this year. 137 passing yards for Gulbranson is far below 300 that Cal had averaged. I don't know. It's hard to criticize that when you are going to run the ball a ton in that game. I'm curious to see if it was closer, maybe Oregon State would have put up those kinds of numbers. But they didn't have to. So that's worth something there. Defensively.
My key defensively was to stop Ott and let the secondary handle the passing attack. Abso-freaking-lutely.
Jaden Ott, 8 carries for 20 yards, 4 catches for 6 yards. Incredibly inefficient there. 26 total yards on 12 touches in the run and pass game. He got game scripted in the worst way. There's no doubt about it, but still a non-factor, which not easy to do against.
And the secondary took care of the passing attack. So it was a win all the way around. Carter, you wanted to find balance between pressuring Plummer and containing Ott. So very similar to mine that they did it.
Yeah, thought they did it. Completely stifled that running game. Again, just the 9 yards.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was because they got to Plummer and reduced the rushing numbers by sacking him. So, I thought the balance was exactly what you wanted to see. And Oregon State took a huge step forward defensively after a few shortcomings against a UW team last week in Seattle. Anything else, Angie, before we get out of here?
No, but 2 weeks, 2 games left until the bowl game. Crazy.
Mid-November. It's coming up. We almost have to flip gears to basketball. A little less painful to do that this year, for sure, though.
Yes.
We're going to enjoy football season while it lasts, and we'll be back on Thursday to preview Arizona State, Oregon State's final road trip of the season, unless you count the bowl game as a road trip. But until then, you can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns. We'll be back on Thursday for another episode of the Damn Podcast.